In ancient Athens, visiting a brothel didn't cost much, just the price of a couple of flatbreads, or even less than a jug of cheap wine. The women working there, called porni, were at the bottom of the system. According to records from court speeches, many of them saw between 6 and 10 clients every day, earning barely enough to survive. Meanwhile, the brothel owners made huge profits and paid a share of it to the city in taxes. There were no age restrictions in these places. Evidence shows that girls as young as 10 to 13 were forced into this life. Many were enslaved and marked with a hot iron on their thigh, showing they were considered property. The conditions were harsh and painful. If a girl refused to work, she could be whipped in public, starved for days, or face even worse treatment. When a new girl arrived, something terrible was done to her in front of others, both the women and the customers. A man from Thessaly once said this was meant to break her spirit completely. The crowd often clapped and laughed, treating the violence as a show. New girls were seen as more valuable than those who had been there a while. Men paid much more to be with someone who had not yet been harmed. Writers from the time described these transactions as casually as shopping for fruit at the market. Privacy didn't exist. Women worked in shared rooms, separated only by thin, dirty cloths. The sounds of suffering became part of the entertainment for those waiting nearby. The brothel owners categorized the women. There were women from different regions, those who were small in size, those who couldn't speak, fighters, and others who still resisted. Each group had its own price and different types of customers. Artwork from that era even shows contests where men tried to overpower a resisting woman just for amusement. Messages scratched into the walls of these places show that some customers paid extra to cause harm, scarring faces, leaving bruises, or worse. For some, causing pain was part of the experience. Women who were meant to be punished were priced higher. Injuries like cut lips, missing teeth, and burns were sometimes what certain clients looked for. Some saw the pain as a kind of entertainment. Her cries were treated like music to those who were drunk. This all happened in the same city known for its thinkers and playwrights. And yet, the most profitable business was built on the suffering of others. Religious festivals made things even worse. During certain events, like the Festival of Dionia, women from brothels were handed over to groups of men as part of the celebration. Writings from that time describe these acts without any shame. Crowds hurt women while music played and wine flowed. People joked and placed bets on how long the woman would survive. On those days, whatever dignity a woman had left disappeared completely. She became part of the show. Medical notes from the time mention that some women died from internal injuries, from suffocating during attacks, or from losing too much blood. Religious leaders claimed these acts were meant to please their gods. They mixed wine with blood at altars, calling it a blessing for the harvest. Survivors were dragged back to work if they were still alive. Those who didn't make it were dumped outside the city in valleys, treated like trash. These brutal festivals were just one part of a larger system that hurt women every single day. Beatings and abuse weren't rare. They were routine. Women were often hit, sometimes with sticks, leather straps, or just bare hands. The men who controlled them also allowed their regular customers to hurt them, sometimes turning punishment into games. For even the smallest mistake, like spilling a drink, mispronouncing a name, or crying, women could be locked in dark rooms without food or water. Sometimes they were tied up outside in freezing nights wearing wet clothes or left out under the blazing sun with nothing to drink. These punishments were called character correction. Other times, objects like wooden clubs, cups, or knife handles were used to harm them when they disobeyed. The women learned to hide their pain behind forced smiles, knowing that showing any emotion would only bring more violence. In a city known for admiring beauty, women's bodies were covered in wounds. Trying to escape wasn't seen as running for freedom, it was treated as stealing someone's property. The punishment for escaping was public and harsh. Some women were burned with hot metal on their forehead or chest to mark them as runaways. In some cases, court documents show that women were nailed to wooden boards and left in public squares as warnings. Some died from dehydration or infections. In desperation, some women ran to temples to beg for help, but priests would return them to their owners for a small reward. Property rights mattered more than human life. Runaways were dragged back in chains, and the blood left on temple steps was scrubbed away by other slaves the next morning. Each escape attempt made future punishment worse. The justice system had endless ways to break women down without completely destroying their value. But even that value meant little, because new women were easy to buy. Medical notes from that time say most of these women didn't live past 25. Constant injuries, untreated illnesses, infections, and exhaustion wore them down. Women with infected wounds, foul-smelling discharge, or open sores were still forced to work until their bodies gave out. Treating them was seen as too expensive. Buying a new girl cost less than a single doctor's visit. Some customers complained about the smell of rotting flesh, so owners would beat the sick women as if that could cure them. Digs around old brothels have uncovered bones of women with damaged hips, skull fractures, broken ribs, and twisted spines, clear signs of long-term abuse. When a woman became too sick to keep working, she was carried outside the city and left there, alive or not. In the same Athens that praised art and ideal forms, women's bodies were discarded like broken tools. Pregnancy was seen as a problem. It slowed the women down and brought extra costs. To stop births, women were given dangerous drinks, hit in the stomach, or forced to carry heavy loads. Medical texts describe hidden abortions using harmful herbs, hot oil, or sharp wooden sticks. If pregnancy couldn't be stopped, women gave birth alone on the same filthy mats where they worked. There were no midwives, no medicine, and no care. Many women died from blood loss or infection. Archaeologists have found tiny bones in drains and trash heaps near these brothels, remains of newborns who didn't survive. Killing newborns was common. To the owners, babies just meant more mouths to feed and time off work. Women, having no other option, often ended their own babies' lives, the only act of mercy they could control. Under the law in Athens, these women had no legal identity. They were not considered people. Everything they had, even their bodies, belonged to their owners. They were forced to work off fake debts for food, clothing, or shelter. These debts kept growing with interest and daily penalties. A woman couldn't refuse any client, no matter how violent or dangerous he was. Whether a woman said yes or no didn't matter. The law didn't recognize her right to choose. She was treated as property, not as a person. Court documents show that some women tried to report abuse, but judges ignored them. A slave couldn't legally speak against a free man. If her words were to be considered at all, she had to be tortured first to prove she was telling the truth. This was the same society that claimed to invent democracy, but half its people had no say in anything. Enslaved women were stuck at the very bottom, lower than farm animals, which at least got fed. Now and then, one of these women might become a favorite of her owner or a wealthy customer. That gave her some privileges, a room of her own, better clothes, jewelry, and cleaner surroundings. But this wasn't freedom. It was just a nicer prison, with someone always watching. Her safety depended completely on the man's mood. He could send her back to the common brothel, or worse, at any time. In some cases, these women were gifted to visiting guests, treated like a fancy item loaned out for the night. Even the most respected women in this system were still seen as objects, just more expensive ones. Gold chains, but chains all the same. Eventually, every woman in this system grew older, and when she did, her value dropped. Favorites, common workers, it didn't matter. They all ended up the same way, forgotten. These women didn't receive proper burials. Their bodies weren't honored with Greek funeral rites. They were dumped outside the city, buried in unmarked pits, or left in valleys like trash. They had no gravestones, no names, no offerings. Even those who were freed from slavery couldn't escape their past. They were banned from public life and treated like they had never existed. Archaeologists have found the remains of women mixed in with broken pots and household waste. That's where many of them ended up, buried with garbage. No names, no stories, no memory. Athens wrote poems about heroes, but these women's lives were never remembered. Their suffering wasn't seen as important enough for history. And even worse, it was often turned into entertainment. Comedies by writers like Aristophanes mocked women in this system. They were shown as crude, foolish, or just there to be laughed at and hurt. Crowds in theaters laughed at scenes of abuse. Pain became comedy. Pottery in ancient Athens often showed scenes of violence against women, treated as everyday art. While elite courtesans were praised in poems, most enslaved women were mocked, their pain turned into jokes. Prostitution brought steady income through taxes and the slave trade, powering a city that excluded women from public life. Athens celebrated virtue and democracy, yet built its greatness on the suffering of the powerless. Temples, schools, even the Parthenon, were funded by lives erased from history. Modern accounts often ignore them, but their memory remains, hidden in ruins, still waiting to be acknowledged. Their stories deserve to be told.